My stepmother Brenda had me locked away in a care facility using a fake doctor's note just so she could steal my childhood home. She thought mild cerebral palsy meant I couldn't fight back. What she didn't know, I used to audit fraud cases for a living, and I kept every receipt. The morning they came for me, I locked the front door with the same brass key I'd used since I was 9. The metal felt warm in my hand, like it still remembered me. I paused on the porch and looked around one last time. The swing creaked gently in the breeze. The mailbox still leaned to one side like it was eavesdropping. Honeysuckle clung to the fence with stubborn grace. Then I pulled out my phone and left Tom a message. "Hi Tom, it's done. She had me committed. I need your help." It was the calmest I'd ever sounded, while saying the most unthinkable thing. I didn't cry. Not then. But I did hold the railing a second longer than necessary. My leg was stiff that morning, probably from nerves, and the slope of the porch had always made walking tricky. Still, I moved down the steps the way I always had, shoulders squared, chin lifted, left foot dragging just slightly behind. The van that pulled up wasn't medical, no logos, no gurneys, just a sleek black vehicle with tinted windows and a driver who didn't bother introducing himself. He helped me into the back like I was a delivery, something to be transported, not someone to be understood. By the time we arrived at Silver Grove's assisted living, I already knew I wasn't here for rehab or rest. Knew I wasn't getting out unless I figured out what the hell Brenda had done. Inside, the hall smelled like lemon disinfectant and boiled cabbage. Nurses smiled with that mix of pity and boredom that made my skin crawl. One called me sweetheart and patted my arm like I was 104 and drooling. "I'm 44. I have mild cerebral palsy. I use a cane. I do not need a padded dining chair or a bed that tilts with a button. What I needed was to go home. But my home, my childhood home, wasn't mine anymore. Not officially. Brenda had seen to that. They wheeled me to room 3C like it was some kind of honor. Pale green walls, a plastic bed, and a roommate named Shirley who snored like a freight train and asked the same 3 questions on repeat. Where's my purse? Who moved my slippers? Is it Thursday? It was Monday. I'd been there 6 hours when I finally saw the admission forms. Not mine, of course. I wasn't allowed to review anything, not even the glossy brochure with compassion, community, care, printed on the cover in cheery font. But I'd spent 15 years sorting contracts and auditing paperwork as an accountant. I know a rushed signature when I see one. The doctor who'd signed off on my competency test? Never met him. The evaluation they referenced? Supposedly done during a checkup I'd missed entirely. That's when the nurse handed me a white pill in a tiny paper cup and said, "For your anxiety, hon, doctor's orders." I didn't take it. Instead, I smiled, slipped it under my tongue, and later flushed it when no one was watching. My anxiety wasn't the problem. Brenda was. It had been 6 months since my dad passed out. 1 heart attack, no warning, just gone. And in the weeks after, while I'd been organizing his estate, trying to figure out his passwords, his pension, his scattered bank accounts, Brenda had been busy too, smiling in public, whispering to her lawyer, asking if I'd really thought about my next steps. Apparently she had. I wasn't even cold in grief when she started suggesting, maybe it's time to downsize. When I didn't take the bait, she escalated. The first time I noticed something strange was a letter from the water company addressed to her name. Not mine. Not Dad's. Brenda. That house was willed to me. I remembered the clause. Fully transfers to my daughter Claire with exclusive rights to inhabit, lease, or sell the property. My father had insisted on it. But something had changed. And now, instead of sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, I was in a drafty shared room, listening to Shirley hum old hymns, and trying not to gag on overcooked peas and lemon-scented floors. Tom visited on day 2. He took one look at the visitor logbook, scanned the way the nurse asked him to sign a, quote, restricted visitor release, and said quietly, "She railroaded you, didn't she?" I nodded. "I don't know how yet," I said, "but Brenda's trying to take the house, maybe everything." He rubbed his jaw. "Want me to start digging?" "Please. And start with the will." I should have known something was off when she smiled at the funeral. Not a sad smile. Not grief. It was a subtle curl at the corners, like she'd just won something. I'd chalked it up to nerves, maybe shock. People grieve strangely. But now, remembering it from this sterile room with peeling wallpaper and a roommate who talked in her sleep, it felt more like a warning. My dad had always been meticulous with paperwork. After Mom died when I was 15, he handled everything with precision. A good contract, he used to say, is like a seatbelt. You hope you don't need it, but when the crash comes, thank God it's there. He'd rewritten the will after his second marriage, making it clear the house would pass to me. Brenda would receive a monthly stipend from a living trust, enough for her needs, but not enough to meddle. He even had Harriet, his oldest friend, a retired librarian, and the closest thing I had to an aunt, witness the final version. Dad wasn't rich, but he wanted to be fair. Or so I thought. 2 weeks after the funeral, I'd asked Brenda if she'd seen the original copy. She waved a manicured hand and said the lawyer had it, that she'd already handled everything. Said it with the same tone you use to tell someone you took the trash out before they could. That was the beginning. Then came the subtle power grabs, my name disappearing from the utility accounts, mail addressed to current resident, a notice from the county assessor's office about a pending change in property ownership. And then 2 weeks ago, a doctor's appointment I'd never scheduled. One I supposedly attended, one that included a competency screening. Brenda must have found some doctor, or someone posing as one, willing to say I couldn't manage on my own. Mild cerebral palsy is not dementia. I've been independent all my life. Worked, filed taxes, paid bills. But suddenly, a stranger's opinion outweighed decades of proof. Tom and I had requested the will from Dad's lawyer. What we got was a scanned PDF. My name wasn't on it. Not once. Not as beneficiary, not as co-owner, not even as a footnote. Brenda's name, though, plastered all over. And her signature at the bottom, next to Dad's. Except it wasn't his usual scrawl. No loops in the J. No curl at the D. I'd seen him sign documents hundreds of times. That wasn't it. Something stunk. And it wasn't just the boiled cabbage again. I started small. The facility had a community room with a dusty old Dell computer meant for patient enrichment. Most residents used it to play solitaire. I used it to pull property records. The Wi-Fi was slow, and the keyboard stuck on the S key, but I got what I needed. A transfer request, filed 5 weeks after Dad's death. Initiated by Brenda. Listing her as sole owner, supported by a version of the will I'd never seen. I printed it on brittle paper that smelled like toner and hand sanitizer. It was dated the day after Dad's funeral. Witnessed by a notary who, according to a quick LinkedIn search, happened to be Brenda's old coworker from the bank. Subtle. Tom visited twice that week. He came after work, still in his button-downs and loosened tie, sneaking in contraband muffins and a legal pad. I asked him to start digging deeper. I told him I needed 3 things. 1. The original will. Dad gave a copy to Harriet. 2. Brenda's emails. She wasn't tech-savvy, and Tom had a contact in digital forensics. 3. A copy of my medical evaluation, the one that had deemed me incompetent. Lacey, the home aide assigned to Shirley and me, overheard us whispering. She lingered after breakfast the next day, scrubbing a counter that didn't need scrubbing, and then slid me a note folded under a napkin. Call me if you want to know what goes on here. Don't trust the nurse with the pink glasses. Zayn L. I tucked the note into the sleeve of my planner and smiled. I didn't trust any of them. That afternoon, Brenda showed up. First time she'd visited since dropping me off. She wore her signature scent, powder and stale lipstick, and carried a purse too big for someone who claimed to be just checking in. She looked around the room with fake concern and said, "It's lovely, isn't it? Peaceful." I didn't answer. She sat primly on the visitor's chair, crossing her legs like she was posing for a picture. "You're in good hands here. I know it's a lot to take in, but this will be better for everyone." Everyone being her, of course. "I've already started the paperwork on the house," she added casually. "They said I can list it by next month, maybe sooner." I didn't react. I let her think she had the upper hand. Because what she didn't know, what no one here knew, was that I wasn't just an accountant. I'd spent 3 years studying estate law, while helping Dad sort out his pension and final arrangements. I knew the language, the loopholes, and the landmines. I didn't practice, but I knew exactly what a forged signature looked like. And I'd just found mine. On a power of attorney form Brenda had filed 3 months ago. One I'd never signed. Tom's text came at 7:42 a.m., just after I'd choked down a breakfast of watery eggs and cold toast. Claire. Found something. Brenda's listing the house. Open house scheduled for Sunday. Sunday. That was 5 days away. I stared at the message until my fingers went numb. Then I tucked my phone under my blanket before the nurse could walk by and demand I hand it over. Technically, we weren't supposed to have unmonitored devices. Technically, I wasn't supposed to be here either. I told myself I had time, that once I had enough evidence, once I could build a case brick by brick, I'd come back swinging. But now, I was out of time. Brenda had found a fast-track listing agent. Tom had pulled the flyer from a public real estate portal. The photo of my childhood home made my throat tighten. The wraparound porch, the big oak tree, the blue shutters Dad repainted every spring. My sanctuary, now described as a charming vintage opportunity. Motivated seller, priced to move. I was the motivated target, apparently. I called Tom using Lacey's burner phone during her smoke break. She handed it off like we were spies in a thriller. We kept it short. Whispered. I found Harriet, he said. She still has the card your dad sent last year, the one where he mentioned the trust clause. That clause was everything. It stated that if I was unable to reside in the house for health reasons, ownership passed to a trustee, not Brenda, the trustee being Harriet. But here's the kicker, Tom continued. The clause only kicks in if there's a valid medical declaration. Which there isn't, I whispered. Exactly. If we can prove that, we prove Brenda acted illegally. Then he hesitated. But she's moving fast, Claire. She's filed notice of sale. If escrow starts, it gets a lot harder to unwind it. I clenched the phone. We have to stop it. Legally, publicly, and soon. Already working on it. I've contacted the notary registry, and Harriet agreed to appear as a witness. We've also flagged the forged power of attorney. It was filed without a second witness, which violates statute. But we need to hit hard before Sunday. How hard? He exhaled. You need to show up, in person, with the original documents. I looked around my room. My roommate muttering in her sleep. My metal-framed bed. The call button blinking uselessly. A nurse humming in the hallway. I didn't know how I'd do it. But I knew I would. Because Brenda was about to find out what happens when you overlook the quiet one with the cane and the law degree she never talked about. The estate meeting was held in a glossy conference room downtown. Marble floors, overpriced water bottles, and a skyline view Brenda probably thought made her look important. She wore a pale pink suit and a smug little expression, like the whole event was just a formality. And it would have been if I hadn't walked in. The room went silent when I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Cane in one hand, manila folder in the other, Tom at my side like a silent bodyguard. Brenda's jaw dropped so fast it practically echoed. Claire, she said, blinking. You're not. How did you? Good morning, I cut in, voice calm. I believe I'm on the schedule. The realtor stammered something about privacy and pre-approved parties. Tom pulled out a notarized letter. My client is the legal heir of the property in question, and she has a few documents to clear up a misunderstanding. Brenda's attorney, some sunburned man in a wrinkled suit who looked like he hadn't read a file since 2008, tried to intervene. Ms. Claire was removed under medical guidance. She's not in a position to contest. I opened the manila folder and pulled out the scanned copy of the evaluation. Signed by a doctor I never met, on a date I wasn't even in the state, I said. This signature, I tapped the scrawl, belongs to a dentist, not a physician. Tom handed the realtor a copy of the real will, the one Dad had signed, witnessed by Harriet, and stored in a safety box I'd recovered from the attic 3 months before the funeral. The version Brenda had lost. And then, like a finale, Harriet stepped through the door. 80 years old. Navy dress. Hair pinned up and sensible shoes clicking with conviction. I was there when your father signed the will, she said, voice clear as a bell. He made it very plain. Claire inherits the house. I'm listed as trustee if, and only if, she's found medically unable to live alone by 2 qualified physicians. That never happened. Brenda stood frozen, her mouth twitching like she couldn't decide whether to scream or fake faint. And I wasn't done. I placed the forged power of attorney form on the table. This was filed 3 weeks after Dad's funeral. It lists my signature. Problem is, I pulled a sheet of lined paper from my bag. I was in physical therapy that week, and my therapist can confirm I fractured my wrist. On my dominant hand, I couldn't sign my name. Tom added the final nail, a printed email Brenda had sent to a shady med consultant asking about competency certifications. Quick turnaround. The room was silent. Then the realtor cleared his throat and looked like he wanted to vanish into his clipboard. "Well," he said, voice cracking, "that's quite a development." Brenda turned to her lawyer, panic creeping into her voice. "Do something," he shrugged. "They have the originals, and a notary, and a witness." She looked at me, eyes wild. "You don't understand, Claire. I needed that house. You live alone. You don't need space like that." I stood up, slow and steady. "You thought I was too weak to fight back," I said. "You thought I'd roll over and disappear. You forgot I paid attention." Then I looked straight at her. "And you never read the fine print." By the time we left the conference room, Brenda was no longer the picture of poise. She'd stopped fixing her hair and started tugging at her sleeves like she could shrink into them. Her voice, usually syrupy sweet, had taken on a bitter rasp. She tried to follow us out, sputtering something about misunderstandings and good intentions. But the realtor had already called his legal team, and Tom had filed an emergency motion to freeze the sale. Within 48 hours, the county clerk's office flagged the title transfer as fraudulent. The power of attorney was invalidated. Pending an investigation, the trust clause was reinstated. And Silver Groves? Let's just say they didn't appreciate being dragged into the scandal. Turns out, admitting someone to assisted care requires more than a forged doctor's note and a smug attitude. The facility's director went very quiet once our lawyer submitted the documentation. And Lacey, the aide with the burner phone, testified in writing that Brenda had pushed for a rush admission, calling me barely functional. She also leaked the voicemail Brenda left on her phone, the one where Brenda said, "Just keep her comfortable until I can list the house. She won't last long anyway." That one went viral after Harriet shared it with a local reporter. Suddenly, Brenda's face was on the news under the chyron. "Stepdaughter fraud victim speaks out." I didn't go on camera, but I did release a statement. Just a few lines, typed carefully, and read aloud by Harriet in front of my porch. "This house holds my history. It's where I learned to walk with braces. Where my father taught me to balance a checkbook and speak up when it mattered. I intend to protect what's mine, not just for me, but for every woman who's ever been dismissed as weak." By the following week, Brenda was under investigation for elder fraud, forgery, and unlawful coercion. Her lawyer dropped her. The realtor cut ties. And the same nosy neighbor who once asked why I didn't just let Brenda take over was now bringing me pound cake and apologies. Brenda left town for a bit, but not before the sheriff's deputy served her at brunch, right in front of her bridge club. The look on her face, caught in a blurry cell phone photo, was better than any courtroom scene. The house looked different 6 months later. Not because it had changed, because I had. Gone were the sagging porch boards and the stubborn front step that always tripped my cane. We'd replaced them with a smooth ramp and motion lights. Inside, we widened doorways, lowered countertops, and added a full-access bathroom on the main floor with rails and a roll-in shower, but the heart of it stayed the same. Dad's bookshelf, still crooked in the corner. Gran's cookie tin on top of the fridge. My high school trophies lined up like quiet proof. I was never the fragile little thing Brenda tried to make me. Tom helped secure the grant for accessible housing renovation. Harriet made calls, pulled strings, and roped in a community sponsor who covered part of the costs. And Lacey, sweet, tough, loyal Lacey, moved in upstairs. She runs the co-living project with me now. Because that's what we turned it into, the Grove House. An accessible co-op for women with mobility challenges, chronic illnesses, or any of the 100 things that make independence feel like an uphill battle. We have 4 residents already. A waiting list of 10. We cook together, we host movie nights, we leave the porch light on. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Harriet wore her Sunday hat and held the giant scissors like she'd won the lottery. "This," she said proudly, "is what legacy looks like." Brenda never showed, but her name came up plenty. In whispers, in questions, in careful, pitying headshakes. No one wants to say the word fraudster out loud. But they say bless her heart a lot, and around here, that's about the same thing. The last I heard, she was living with her cousin in another county, waiting on her case review. I didn't lose sleep over it, because I had better things to do, like repainting the hallway sunshine yellow, like helping Denise from room 2 get fitted for her new walker, like finally sitting on the front porch with my morning coffee, nothing aching but my back, nothing weighing me down but the memory of what almost was. It arrived on a Thursday, tucked between a utility bill and a coupon flyer. A postcard, bright orange, tacky font, stamped from a correctional facility 2 counties over. "Claire, guess you won. Hope the house is everything you dreamed of. I've been doing some reading of my own. Maybe I'll write a book about all this one day. They say adversity builds character. Hugs, Brenda." I read it once, then again, and I laughed. A full, deep, undignified laugh that startled Denise, who was carrying a laundry basket down the hall. I handed her the card and watched her face twist in confused amusement. "She really thought that would rattle you?" she asked. "She really thought that would matter," I said. I pinned it to the fridge. Not in anger, not as a warning, as a trophy. A tiny, smug, narcissistic souvenir of a woman who never once considered she might lose, who thought she'd buried me under lemon disinfectant and half-truths and legal shortcuts. But I'd read the fine print. And now, the house she tried to steal is filled with women she never thought deserved space. Women who read the fine print, too. I went back to cooking dinner, stirring marinara sauce while the kitchen filled with laughter from the living room. Outside, the porch glowed under string lights. Inside, I felt nothing but peace. Brenda could write her little book, maybe call it How I Got Outplayed by a Stepdaughter with a Cane and a Contract. I'd read that. Once. Then I'd use it to prop open the door for someone who needed a place to stay. It was in the bottom drawer of Dad's old filing cabinet, the one Brenda hadn't gotten to, because she never knew it existed. Hidden behind a false panel, beneath a stack of warranty receipts and tax returns from 1998, I found the last envelope my father had labeled in his blocky handwriting. "Claire, read if there's trouble." My heart pounded as I slid my finger beneath the flap. Inside was a copy of the real will. The one Harriet already had on file, but this version had something extra, a second page, stapled behind the original, printed on different paper stock, and signed. It detailed a contingency clause Dad added the day after Brenda helped him home from the hospital. He'd sensed it then, I realized. The shift, her subtle angling. The clause was brilliant, simple, binding, and hidden in plain sight. If at any point an attempt was made to assume control of the property using fabricated medical information, the house and all its contents would be placed in a private trust, administered by a third-party fiduciary, Harriet. Brenda had signed it. She initialed each line, right next to the clause. She just never turned the page over, never noticed the extra half-inch of paper weight, never questioned why Dad had insisted she initial every paragraph, not just the first page. She'd skimmed it, smiled, signed, and sealed her own fate. I made a fresh copy and added it to the manila folder I kept tucked beside my bed, because just in case Brenda ever tried anything else, anything petty or desperate or borderline legal, I had her signature on the clause that buried her scheme before it ever stood a chance. I replayed it so many times in my head, I could have sketched it from memory. The funeral was held on a crisp October morning. A bite in the air. The trees had turned that perfect gold Dad loved. He'd always said fall was the reward for surviving the sticky parts. People came in droves. Neighbors, old coworkers, the man from the gas station who'd let him fill his tires for free. They spoke with soft voices, hugged too long, and left casserole dishes on the porch. And Brenda? Brenda beamed. Not outwardly. Not enough for anyone else to clock it. But I saw it. The little smirk when she leaned in to whisper, "You don't need to speak, Claire. I'll handle it." The way she dabbed her eyes at all the right moments, but her cheeks stayed dry. She stood at the casket like a politician, grieving in high heels. I thought it was nerves. Grief makes people act strange. But now I knew better. That smile wasn't sadness. It was satisfaction. Because she thought she'd pulled it off. The will had already been swapped. The transfer was in motion. She'd probably booked the notary that very afternoon. While I stood there shaking hands with Dad's war buddies and holding back tears, she was flipping through brochures for estate liquidators. I'd never wanted to believe she was capable of that kind of cruelty. Not after the way she used to tuck me in during my teen surgeries. Not after the Thanksgiving she made 3 different pies because I couldn't decide. But I think that was the game all along. Play nurturing long enough to be trusted. Then strike when no one's looking. And for a while, it worked. Until she smiled at a funeral and forgot I was watching. I'd seen the will before. The real one. I sat at the kitchen table with Dad 3 months before he passed. August sun pouring through the window, my legs aching from PT, the scent of his aftershave still clinging to the envelope. He'd made me read it line by line, even had me initial the bottom margin like a witness. It named me as sole beneficiary of the house, stated clearly that the property would pass directly into my name, regardless of marital status, employment, or physical ability. So when Brenda handed over her version, printed on crisp new paper, clipped to a stapled folder, I didn't flinch. At first. She sat across from me with her little notary friend, sipping chamomile tea like we were in a PTA meeting. "Just a formality," she'd said. "We'll need this filed if we want to avoid probate. I know you're overwhelmed, so I took the liberty." That word, liberty. It clanged like a warning bell. I scanned the top of the document, already feeling the itch crawl up my spine. No, Claire. No mention of me at all. Brenda's name appeared 4 times on the first page. Once in bold, once next to executor, once as sole inheritor, and once as surviving spouse with full rights of ownership. I looked up. She was watching me too closely. That tight smile. That flicker of breathlessness like she was holding something down. "I think there's been a mistake," I said, flipping pages. "Oh?" she said too sweetly. "I had the lawyer review it himself." "Funny," I replied, "because the lawyer told me you canceled my last appointment." The notary shifted in her seat. I slid the will back across the table and stood. "Let me know when you find the version with my name on it," I said, my voice cold. Because I know for a fact, I was never left out of my father's will. When Brenda filed the false competency report, she added a statement to the petition for control of the estate. It read, "Due to Claire's physical limitations and dependent status, she is unfit to manage a residential property and its financial responsibilities." I nearly laughed when I read it. Dependent? I'd managed more spreadsheets in my life than she'd managed coherent thoughts. I'd worked for 15 years as a senior accountant, handling estates larger than the one she was trying to scam. I'd tracked investments, minimized taxes, and even done pro bono work for disability nonprofits on the side. Brenda, on the other hand, once confused escrow with escargot. She thought I just liked numbers. She didn't know I had 3 letters after my name. CPA. I'd earned that degree with braces on my legs and a laptop I balanced on textbooks because the school library didn't have adjustable desks. I'd stayed up late, studied harder, fought for every point, not because I was trying to prove something to the world, but because I wanted to prove it to myself. Brenda never saw that version of me, because she never bothered to look past the cane. She assumed I was slow, fragile, easy to shuffle out of the way with a few forged signatures and a doctor's note. But the moment she questioned my ability to manage a property, my property, was the moment she walked straight into a trap, because I didn't just own the house. I understood every number, clause, fee, and loophole that came with it. The bills had my name, the taxes had my fingerprint. The equity was mine, not just in inheritance, but in sweat, calculation, and absolute clarity. Brenda thought the house was a prize to be stolen. But to me, it was a ledger entry. And she was already deep in the red. There was a night, about a week into the facility, when I almost folded. I'd hit wall after wall. My name scrubbed from legal documents, power of attorney in Brenda's hands, the realtor already drafting a listing. And the kicker? She'd called Tom. Told him to stop interfering. Said I was safe and comfortable, and that he was making trouble for nothing. That night, I sat in the common room, watching the television flicker through a rerun of Murder, She Wrote. Shirley snored softly in the recliner next to me. The lemon-scented air made my throat tight. I stared at the manila folder in my lap and wondered if maybe, just maybe, it wasn't worth the fight. But habit is a powerful thing. So I opened the folder one more time, started from the top, and that's when I saw it. Buried in the original trust documents Dad had filed, way back, before he even met Brenda, was a clause I'd read 100 times without fully seeing it. It was labeled Contingency Clause 12B, Protection Against Undue Influence, and it was bolded. It read, should any named beneficiary or executor attempt to alter, override, or accelerate control of estate assets by means of misrepresentation, coercion, or exploitation of the medical or legal incapacity of another, their claim to said assets shall be null and void. I read it again, and then I laughed. Quietly at first, just a breathless exhale, then full-on, uncontrollable face-in-my-hands laughter. Because Brenda didn't just overreach, she triggered the very clause designed to eliminate her. Dad had anticipated this, maybe not Brenda specifically, but the possibility. The human tendency to grab for what isn't theirs. He knew the world wasn't always kind to people like me. And in his last act of protection, he'd planted a seed of justice deep in the legal soil. And now? It was blooming. That clause turned everything. It validated the forged will challenge. It transferred control back to Harriet, pending medical review. It stopped the sale. It gave me leverage. And then some. Brenda hadn't just lost. She'd disqualified herself. And I was done waiting quietly in her shadow.